Pakistan Beyond the Crisis State, Editor Maleeha Lodhi. Introduction. From the majestic Himalayan and the Karakoram mountain ranges, the Indus River winds down the plains of Pakistan for nearly 1,000 miles to the Arabian Sea. The banks of this river have been home to one of the world's oldest and greatest civilizations. The mighty river has been the country's lifeblood, animating much of its culture and history and helping to shape a distinctly Pakistani identity. In the summer of 2010, it was the fury of the Indus River that unleashed itself on the country with devastating consequences. Engorged by heavy monsoon rain, the river system overflooded and delugged large swaths of Pakistan, as much as a fifth of its land area, causing large-scale destruction and displacement. 20 million people were affected by this calamity, and this is at a time when Pakistan was struggling to cope with the economic and security crisis and reeling from the blowback of 9 years of war in neighboring Afghanistan that started with the US-led military intervention in 2001. The floods exposed a paradox that lies at the heart of Pakistan's predicament today, that of a weak state and a strong society. As the government machinery foundered in responding to the situation, civil society, the business community, ordinary citizens, and even the media organized efforts to help flood victims. The anemic official response, notwithstanding with armies' effective rescue and relief efforts, contrasted sharply with the heroic actions taken by private charities and local communities. What also mitigated the tragedy was the capacity for endurance of the afflicted, who set out rebuilding their homes and lives almost as soon as the waters receded, and with remarkable dignity and an unfazed resolve to overcome the challenge. Resilience has been part of Pakistan's history from country's inception, obscured by single-issue lens through which outsiders have lately viewed the nation. The prism of terror and extremism has deflected attention away from the strength and stability of its underlying social structures, which have enabled the country to weather national and regional storms and rebound from disasters, natural and man-made. Many foreign observers thought when the flood struck that this was one crisis too many which would finally tip Pakistan over the edge. But the country defied the doomsday prognosis as it had earlier. While Pakistan had to navigate multiple challenges, it has always been more of an entity that lurches from crisis to crisis. Its promising potential lies in a number of attributes: an able pool of professionals and technically trained people, a hard-working labor force, growing middle class, an enterprising business community, an energetic free media, and a lively arts, literature, and music scene. Pakistan's culture plurality and open society are sinews of its strengths. It has significant industrial base, an elaborate infrastructure of roads and communication links, a modern banking system, a large domestic market, and a thriving informal economy, factors that have averted national breakdown even when in the throes of severe financial crisis. Its economic problems are rooted in poor state management, not Pakistan's economic fundamentals, which remain robust. It has managed in spurts to achieve high rates of economic growth, not merely to keep pace with an exploding population, but sufficient to invest the country with several features of modern nation. Successive governments, however, have been unable to deploy these ingredients for success to unlock Pakistan's potential. Instead, poor governance, rule without law, and short-sighted leadership have mired the country in layers of crisis that have gravely retarded Pakistan's progress and development. It does not have to be this way. The country may yet escape its difficult first 63 years, resolve its problem, and reimagine its future. But doing so will need a capable leadership with vision and determination to chart a new course. This volume explores the path to a post-crisis state by identifying the policy responses that can bring about such an outcome. It is inspired by the belief that Pakistan's problems are solvable and its challenges can be overcome, and that Pakistanis themselves must reclaim their country by extricating it from numerous challenges it faces. Usually edited books emerge from conferences. This book is the product of a virtual conference in cyberspace that led to a meeting of minds among some of the Pakistan's top practitioners and scholars about the need to a new dimension to the ongoing debate on whether Pakistan. This collection offers a diversity of views and perspectives, but what binds all the distinguished contributors in the belief that Pakistan's challenges are surmountable and the impetus for change and renewal can only come from within through bold reforms that are identified in the chapters that follow. The issues discussed in the book cluster around the themes of governance, security, economic and human development, and foreign policy, underlying the complex intersection of domestic and international factors that have shaped, if not determined, the Pakistan's experience. In the opening chapter of the volume, Pakistan's leading historian, Aisha Jalal, considers the country's current predicament in the light of a troubled past. She describes how national paranoia has taken hold of the country and identifies the lack of a critical historical tradition as the root of the problem. Her chapter argues that Pakistan can change course in a strategic sense and also in the terms of recasting its rational and emotional framework if its people are allowed to delve into their history with open-mindedness. Award-winning novelist Mohsin Hamid represents the third generation of Pakistanis born after independence. His chapter offers an upbeat message of hope and sets out reasons for optimism about Pakistan. Its vastness, diversity, traditions of coexistence, and evolving democracy are identified as important assets. Furthermore, Pakistan has the resources to fund its own development and regenerate itself, provided it chooses to increase its paltry levels of tax collection. Dr. Akbar S. Sayyed, author and anthropologist, seeks to establish that nation's founder and his vision are central to today's debate about the nature and character of Pakistani state. The debate has never been more intense between the advocates of modern functional state, those demanding a theocratic state, and still others urging a balance between the two. No voice is more important in this debate than that of Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Pakistan has yet to live up to the ideal set out in Jinnah's key speeches, but his authority and legitimacy can still be used to translate this into reality. My own chapter explores the intricate interplay between internal and external factors and examines Pakistan's tangled political past of governance failures, patronage-dominated politics, and missed economic opportunities. The country must overcome 5 fault lines to chart new, hopeful course. Socioeconomic changes of the past decade or so have transformed the dynamic between state and society, created larger, more politically assertive middle class, and endangered a stronger, more connected society. Once politics catches up with these change, the foundation would be laid for a functional and responsive state. The next 2 chapters focus on the role of the country's most powerful institution, the military. Shuja Nawaz sets out the factors behind the army's repeated political interventions and wide footprint in national life. He examines its complex relations with the civilian sector and changing internal dynamics to argue the civilian supremacy should be the goal. Sayyid Shafqat explores whether the military hegemony may or will gradually give way to a party-led representative system. He sees 2 paradoxical trends in the post-2008 election period: the continuity of the traditional political elite and the shift in the social composition of the military and civil bureaucracy. He concludes on a hopeful notion by pointing to the emerging national consensus on restricting the political role of the military. Turning to the role that ideology has played in Pakistan's evolution, Zaid Haider argues that religion has been used for multiple purposes, including nation building and security objectives. This has produced blowback that now confronts the country with an unprecedented challenge. Pakistan's viability depends in large part on its ability to develop a new Islamic narrative that can be a force for a progressive change. Dr. Ishrat Hussain, served until recently as the governor of the State Bank. His vast experience informs a detailed consideration of how the civil service can be reformed and economic governance improved, without which, he argues, even well-crafted policies cannot be executed. He advocates building both formal and informal institutions of restraint to ensure a system of checks and balances that can provide the essential pillars of good governance. Pakistan's struggle against militancy and extremism is among its most daunting challenges. Award-winning journalist Zahid Hussain analyzes how present efforts are at once containing and unintentionally incubating the militant threat, and urges a number of mayors to deal with the challenge more effectively and comprehensively. Dr. Mikhail Ahmed is among Pakistan's top economists and has worked in various positions in Planning Commission and International Monetary Fund. From his overview of a troubled economic past, Ahmed draws important lessons. Pakistan, he reasons, needs a regime change in economic policy making and implementation of key reforms to place the economy on a viable footing and realize the country's economic potential. Mudassar Mazhar Malik offers a private sector perspective on economic competitiveness. He evaluates Pakistan's potential from the angle of what gives or can give it a competitive advantage to position it in the global economy. In a forward-looking assessment, he sets out the factors that need to be addressed to evolve a strategy for Pakistan to emerge as a successful economy. The crisis in Pakistan's energy sector is today the single greatest impediment to Pakistan's recovery. Ziad Al-Haddad investigates what it will take to turn the sector around. He argues that lack of a coordinated policy has contributed to the problem. He shows how the right policy approach can help to address Pakistan's seemingly insurmountable energy deficit and pave the way for economic revival. Moeed Yusuf and Shanza Khan make the case that education is critical to Pakistan's recovery. They argue that education, which lies at the heart of Pakistan's challenges, should be regarded as a strategic priority, not just as a development objective. The next decade should act as a corrective period to put in place policies to ensure full education access to all. The authors enumerate both short and long-term measures that are required to achieve this. Feroz Hassan Khan, a former brigadier in the Pakistan Army, relates the story of country's nuclear quest. He details how the development of a covert capability took shape in response to the competing threat from India over 4 decades and reflected the efforts to address its severe security predicament. In explaining the role of nuclear weapons in Pakistan's national security, he argues that on at least 5 occasions since the mid-1980s, a conventional war with India was averted. Munir Akram focuses on the range of strategic challenges that Pakistan now faces. In a tour de force, the internal threat from militancy, the country's interest in Afghanistan, a pervasive challenge from India, the post-9/11 relations with the US are all assessed from the perspective of Pakistan's strategic decline as a consequence of multiple factors, including the economic weaknesses, domestic discord, and strategic confusion. Akram brings his experience in Pakistan's diplomatic service to bear on the critical question of how country can reverse its political, economic, and diplomatic marginalization in regional and global power relations. Internationally renowned author Ahmed Rashid examines the complex issue of Afghanistan against the backdrop of a faltering US-led war effort, NATO countries looking for the exits, and Pakistan's controversial policies. He assesses the possibility for peace talks to end the long conflict and argues that Pakistan's stance will be critical to the outcome, whether the region descends into chaos or moves towards a negotiated settlement that ensures an orderly withdrawal of Western troops from Afghanistan. Turning elections with India, Dr. Syed Rifat Hussain appraises in the final chapter how efforts to forge a durable peace between the nuclear neighbors have fared against the backdrop of their continued rivalry over Kashmir. Highlighting the fragility of the Pakistan's India peace process, He argues that lasting peace requires an amicable settlement of the Kashmir dispute, India's rising influence as a global power, and the Indo-US strategic partnership are not only aggravating Pakistan's security dilemmas but also discouraging New Delhi from seeking durable rapprochement with Pakistan. The concluding note sets out what needs to be done to address Pakistan's systematic and fundamental challenges to set the country onto a course beyond a crisis state and guarantee its long-term stability. It identifies the critical priorities on which a national consensus needs to be fashioned. It concludes that this is not possible without political will on part of a leadership that is credible and seen to be pursuing goals regarded as legitimate by the wider public.